If I was to say the phrase, love is, what would you fill in the blank? Love is patient, or love is kind, or love is a battlefield, in the words of Pat Benatar. I think if I was to say the phrase, love is, I would say love is a paradox. Or at least it is in my world of faith. I'll just say it that way, that love is a paradox. What do I mean by paradox? Well, a paradox is a statement or a situation that seems contradictory or even opposed to common sense. Like, if I said the phrase, less is more, you almost say, well, how can less be more? But at the same time, like if it's in a speech or in a phrase, if you say less by allowing silence or a pause be inserted for dramatic effect, you find that less can be more. You know what I mean when I talk about that. But love, paradoxical love, it seems to be backwards or upside down. And this is what I'm specifically thinking about, is when I think about the love of Jesus or the way of Jesus, when we as followers of Jesus want to love one another or love the people around us, this love seems paradoxical. It seems like it's contradictory. It seems backwards. It seems upside down. I mean, imagine for a second, Jesus says, love your enemy or bless those who curse you. We as individuals, as human beings, we find ourselves oftentimes living in a world that's retaliation oriented. It's a dog eat dog world. It's an eye for an eye. And so when we live in a culture that is driven by payback or platform or personal gain, this kind of love, this way of Jesus, seems paradoxical. It's upside down. At times, it's even irrational. Yet it's the exact kind of love that was embodied by Jesus. And so we've looked at this passage out of Romans chapter 12. And as the chapter finishes, this love seems like a paradox. It's fierce, but gentle. It's honest and humble. It's self-sacrificing and yet incredibly strong. The big idea here is that Jesus calls us to love in paradoxical ways. Meaning it's not natural, but supernatural. It's not our norm. It's actually irregular to how we respond. But the way that Jesus calls us to love is paradoxical. Here's what I want you to understand is out of Romans chapter 12, this is a passage that I could put on an index card. I could stick it next to the mirror in my bathroom. I could read this every day. And I think this is a passage that I would learn new ways of loving like Jesus by just reading through it and reading through it. Maybe this is what we should do, is commit over the next 7 days that we're just going to read through this passage and remind us to love like Jesus would love. Here's what it says, starting in Romans chapter 12, verse 9. It says this: love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with the Lord's people who are in need, and practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another, and do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay evil with evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed them. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Romans 12 as an entire chapter is really the anthem of living a life of worship, expressing your gifts for the glory of God and the good of the world around you, and then letting it being built on a regular life of love, meaning an everyday, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year kind of love that looks like Jesus. And loving the way Jesus calls us to love is a paradoxical love. Jesus calls us to love in paradoxical ways. And you can broad stroke this passage really to have three kind of paradoxes of a Jesus-shaped love. And the first one is this: love that is sincere and yet strong. Verses 9 through 13 kind of walk through how love must be sincere, not fake, not a show. And the way it shows up as being sincere is it hates what is evil. It clings to what is good. True love involves a moral clarity. But that's the paradox, right? That true love is not just kindness, but it's a conviction. Jesus showed both compassion and confrontation. He wept with the broken, and he flipped tables in the temple when there was injustice. Love that is sincere yet is strong is expressed in the paradoxical love of Jesus. Second of all, there is a love that blesses even when hurt. Let me say that again. Love that blesses even when hurt. Verses 14 through 18 go through this idea of bless those who persecute you and do not repay evil for evil, right? We're called to live at peace with everyone. And so in a world that demands revenge, the love that Jesus shares absorbs the hit. It takes on the cost. Jesus was the one who on the cross, he said these words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The love of Jesus is able to make space and room for God to grow a capacity of love in us that is not naturally found within us. It is a supernatural growth that when we learn to bless those who persecute us, when we learn not to retaliate when people do evil against us, and we choose a different path that may embrace God's grace, that may embrace God's truth, that may still embrace God's justice and righteousness, but is not with a retaliation or a hatred that is rooted in this world. I think the third paradox, if love that is sincere yet strong and love that blesses even when hurt, we can also begin to see the paradox, love that wins by losing. Love that wins by losing. Verses 19 through 21 give us an incredible challenge to do not take revenge, but actually leave room for God's wrath. It's almost the picture of trying to get a rebound in basketball, that in some ways we take a posture where we would box out and clear out. We would not be the one to throw the elbow or strike with our first punch, but we would actually clear out a way and say, no, God, you have your way. First in me, and then in the one who has maybe wronged me. Leave room for God's wrath. Why? Because God will be the one that will ultimately stand as everyone's judge. But what he says is overcome evil with good. This is so difficult. Because I don't know about you, but I've been hurt a few times. I know what it's like to be betrayed. I know what it's like to be either criticized or ridiculed or put in a situation that's not of my longing or not of my intent. And in those moments, what we want to do is we want to retaliate. But there's this picture of heaping burning coals on people's heads. Now, honestly, when I used to read that as a young believer in Jesus, I used to think that somehow we were given the freedom to scorch somebody else's head by an act of kindness, but that's not really what he's talking about. One commentator would describe that people would warm their homes with these coals. They would bring them into their fireplace, or the place that they would heat their house. And these coals would be brought in on a basket on their head, and then it would be dumped out into their house. And so what is being alluded to is that you would heap on their heads this warmth and comfort. And not only would it bless them, they would take it home and it would bless the household itself. Maybe you've got a boss that's difficult. Maybe you've got a coworker that's saying things to other people that breaks your heart. Maybe you've got a family member that is just kind of giving it to you over and over again. And what the writer of Romans 12 is saying, hey, how about you be kind to them? I've got a friend of mine who's he describes his sister-in-law in a less than positive way. And then one day his sister-in-law lost her job. And she was at a loss for words and unsure about what to do next. But he had obviously loved his brother and stayed connected with them as a couple. But he reached out and just said, hey, what can I do to help you in this journey? And sure enough, she took him up for coffee. Over a couple of different meetings, he had a chance to maybe help her troubleshoot and figure out some bumps and bruises of what might have worked or might have helped in that situation, but mostly just wanted to serve her to help her move forward. You know, the truth of the matter is that was not a relationship that he was really designing or hoping to pull close. But now to this day, he talks about how the patience, perseverance, and just the posture of being there to serve his brother and sister-in-law has now created a new relationship that he didn't have before. What I need to almost confess is that I know this doesn't sound very pastoral, but part of the reason I struggle with loving like Jesus is because, frankly, I may not want a relationship with the people that have hurt me. And that's why this is so powerful. That a love that wins by losing can grow us, shape us, and provide for us the capacity to love in a way that only Jesus could. I mean, the paradox is you win not by overpowering your enemy, but by loving them with a supernatural grace. Our ability to learn to love, our ability to learn to forgive, our ability to continue to surrender to Jesus and his love allows us to live in love with the people around us. Jesus' resurrection is proof that a humble, obedient love has the final word. Because in the death and the burial and the resurrection of Jesus, while we were still enemies, Christ died for us. And in that moment, when all the sin and shame of the world was across his shoulders, God was extending his love towards us. It has a profound impact on the way that I think about my own life and the way I want to not only care for my wife and my family or my neighbors or my friends, but specifically, even those that I have a difficult time with, even those that maybe I have hurt and habits and hang-ups against. God's love is paradoxical, and it teaches us to love even those that seem so unlovable. This love is not a love by our might or our strength or our strategy or our intent, but this is a kind of love that only comes by the empowerment of God, that God's Spirit resides in us and transforms us from the inside out. This is not our natural tendency. It is a supernatural gifting. Only a life that is regularly surrendered to the will and the way of Jesus is able to love like this. There's the big idea. Jesus calls us to love in paradoxical ways. So how do we respond to this? I think first and foremost, we need to ask ourselves this question: what version of love are we living out? Am I living out a love that only benefits me? Is it sincere? Is it sacrificial? Or is it self-centered and selective and even safe for me? I have to ask myself first and foremost, am I loving the way Jesus first loves me? Second of all, I think we need to reflect on a few relationships where love is difficult. What's it look like to reflect on some of those difficult relationships? Who would you unfortunately maybe say is an enemy? Somebody who's an adversary? Who is it in your life that has maybe wronged you or hurt you or frankly just annoys you? Somewhere there's probably an older brother thinking about a younger sibling. Somewhere there's probably a coworker thinking about a boss. Somebody is probably watching this who used to go to church but doesn't go to church anymore because of the hurt or the pain that's come their direction. When we reflect on the love that Jesus has for us, what's it look like for us to love even the very difficult people in our lives? Third, I think we need to choose one of the paradoxes we want to begin to apply or live out this week. What if we chose to love sincerely and serve someone with no expectation? What if we blessed someone who we knew, frankly, hurt us? What does it look like to do something radically kind in the way that the world wouldn't expect? Sometimes people talk about this. We pay it forward at the coffee line. We give an extra tip to the person who has served us. That's that way, but dig deep. There's probably a name or a face or a person that is at the tip of your mind right now. Maybe it's a phone call to a loved one you haven't talked to in a while. Maybe it's walking across the cul-de-sac and talking to a neighbor. Whatever it is, to love sincerely, to bless someone, to do something kind, any one of those paradoxes could play out in a significant way. But fourth of all, can I just say, but trust Jesus with the results. I think the big downfall for us could be something like this. What if we do something kind and now we want that person to completely apologize? Or maybe we do something gracious and we want somebody to completely change their attitude. Maybe we walk into our boss's office and we give him a gift or something like that, and then our boss, we expect that raise or we expect that promotion or the recognition. Don't do that. Don't do that. But can we just pour out our lives in appropriate, balanced ways that would say, God, use me, leverage me, and then can I give it away for you to work out? See, the big idea is just that Jesus calls us to love in paradoxical ways. And you could read the end of Romans chapter 12 over and over and over again and learn something new every time. But as we do that, would we change the way that we're thinking, not about loving in a way that we could get, but what we could give? Loving in a way that reflects what Jesus did for us, that we could do for others? Mission Church is a new church for the northwest corner of Minneapolis. And in many ways, we want to be the kind of church, a new church that embodies some of the oldest values of the greater church overall. It's love. And love is more than an anthem, it's an action. Love encourages us to reach out to people that maybe we don't have much in common with. Love oftentimes is very sacrificial and it's selfless. Love helps us look for those who are left out and overlooked. Truth be known, love can be and often is difficult. But it's worth it, isn't it? Mission Church will be a church where a passage like this changes the way that we think. It ruminates in our hearts. It resonates in us as a people. Because at the end of the day, it is God's love that first reached us and changed us. How might we be those kind of people that as we have received his love, we might share his love with others. Join us. Join us as we pursue the way of Jesus together. And let's see how Mission Church can live out this life of love together.